Hello, let's talk about abortion. Many people seem to think that because they have certain religious beliefs, that those beliefs should be foisted upon every other person. But I've got news for you. The only time you have the right to tell someone what they can and can't do with their own body is if you are their conscience. Otherwise, your opinion is invalid. It's as simple as that. I mean, abortion isn't being celebrated by the pro-choice movement. We simply believe that women should have the choice to make decisions about their own bodies. Pro-lifers constantly like to talk about how they believe abortion is murder. Murder of what? A fetus isn't a person, it's just a clump of cells. If I scratched off some skin cells, did I just commit murder? No, obviously not. To imply that something that has no memories or experiences is somehow the same as you or I is not only disingenuous, but clearly wrong. In many cases, it is a mercy to have an abortion. When children are being born where they are unwanted, it is always a travesty. Children shouldn't be forced to come into a world where their mother can't afford to feed them, clothe them, and provide a good education for them. Giving these disadvantaged women an opportunity to terminate the pregnancy is giving them a way out. Shouldn't we make a world where a child isn't born into a home where it is unwanted, potentially abused and neglected, or left in a broken foster care system? Abortion isn't just a woman's right, it is a human right. While we don't celebrate the abortion itself, we should absolutely celebrate the women who get abortions, not picket abortion clinics holding up grotesque images and damning them to hell. These women are merely making a decision about their body that is right for them and will benefit their future. I don't see how anyone can justify using their personal beliefs to take away that right from others. Ultimately, it's her body, and thus, her choice. Who is honestly willing to tell a woman what she can or can't do with her body? We have freedom of religion, or to put it a different way, we have freedom from religion. Whatever your moral value is, shouldn't dictate what a woman can or cannot do. Abortion should not only be legalized, but should be easily accessible. If a woman doesn't want a child, can't afford a child, or, God forbid, is the victim of assault, then she should have the option to abort the pregnancy. If we are willing to live in a country without the protection of open abortion laws, then we are willing to live in a country where a 12-year-old girl could be raped and have to carry that child to term. And to those of you that think that the government can provide resources to struggling women, I would question whether you've ever waited in line to get food stamps, or even something far less essential like a passport. The effort that you have to put in to just get a little government assistance is essentially a full-time job in and of itself. Not to mention that our foster care system is incredibly broken. There are something like 400,000 kids in foster care in the US. Those kids could be in unstable living situations for anywhere from a year to their entire childhood. Are we meant to flood that system with the over 600,000 aborted pregnancies every year? Ultimately, if a woman believes an abortion is okay, then nobody should be able to impose their moral values on her. Hello, let's talk about abortion. The United States has been a bastion of what constitutes appropriate behavior for years. As one of the greatest superpowers in the world, other countries look to the US to understand the benchmark for what is acceptable. So, when the Roe v. Wade verdict made the statement that the United States of America endorsed the right of its citizens to have an abortion, the rest of the world followed suit. We became heralds of a new age. No longer was the US a nation under God. With Roe v. Wade, personal accountability went out the window. Sex became unburdened by the responsibility of bringing a life into this world, and instead, the unbelievably cruel act of murdering babies was made legal. While the other side loves to bring up babies that were the result of incest or rape, it's such a small percentage of the overall number of abortions being performed that it almost doesn't warrant mentioning. However, let's address it for a second. Babies conceived in these rare cases are the exception. And if we permit abortion, it makes more sense to have special allowances to a restrictive law than to make a horrible crime like child murder legal for everyone. But even so, most women who have made the decision to have an abortion regret it later in life. Even if you are only taking the extreme situations like incest or rape, isn't it better to choose adoption rather than the death of an innocent human being? I have seen people offer examples of times when abortion should be available, and none of them seem to increase the value of their argument. Pro-choicers will suggest that if you can see genetic disorders like trisomy 18 in the baby before it's born, that it is somehow merciful to end its life. Why stop at trisomy 18? Why not make it the case for trisomy 21, better known as Down syndrome? I've even heard it suggested that if a child is destined to grow up in a struggling household, that it would be better to kill it. Determining who does and who doesn't have value is exactly what the eugenics movement did. Do you really want to align your values with people like Joseph Mengele and Hitler? Who will they decide to come for next? The old? The infirm? If the value you bring to society is below a certain percentage, will you be considered unworthy of life? If they have a heartbeat, they're alive and therefore have value. One of the best things that's been done in the past few years was the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Maybe now we can go back to the sex education that worked. Abstinence. You can't get pregnant if you don't have sex, and you don't have to worry about an abortion if you can't get pregnant. Let's return to the original values of this country. Save sex for marriage, as God intended. Hello, let's talk about abortion. The one consistent theme that seems to be at the root of abortion is, what is a person? If a zygote is a person, then abortion is murder. But if it's not a person, then abortion is just an elective medical procedure for the betterment of the patient. So, are you a person? Are you sure? It may seem like we're delving unnecessarily into endless questions of definition, the sort of madman's attempt at philosophy. However, these questions are more important than simply labeling an action like abortion bad or good. The morality of an act must be uncertain if the definition of the act is equally uncertain. We reflect this fact in our laws dealing different punishments for involuntary manslaughter versus murder, etc. For our purposes today, I'm not necessarily interested in the morality of stopping a potential human from existing. The moral complications of this topic have been covered by individuals far more talented than I. What I would like to demonstrate is our inability to define even the simplest terms, and that, perhaps, rather than jumping to defend one point of view or the other, we should simply stop and consider the issues more deeply. So, indulge me, if you will. The practical use of words like person or alive is usually done with the assumption that we are understood based on predetermined cultural definitions of terms. However, for our purposes, these assumed definitions are too fraught with misunderstanding and generality to be of much use. We need to understand how to define the exact moment when someone is bestowed with personhood. A person can be defined by a wide array of terms. And while each of these would be an interesting rabbit hole of discussion to explore, the scope of this video will focus specifically on two: life and the conscious mind. Let's begin with what is meant when people say that something is alive. NASA's astrobiology department defines life as having, quote, the potential for movement, growth, self-repair, death, and reproduction. This is a fairly good definition, but maybe we could adapt it with a touch of Thomasticism and define life as matter that has the intrinsic potential to move and or change itself, or prompt itself in some way to operation. This definition will help keep us out of the realm of artificial intelligence, as that would unnecessarily broaden the scope of this video. So, to reiterate, our definition of alive is matter that has the intrinsic potential to move and or change itself or prompt itself in some way to operation. Does this apply to a zygote? Well, yes. It has the intrinsic potential in the form of DNA to move and or change itself. As with all living things, it needs a very specific environment and conditions to achieve this, but the potential is there. That being said, if I cut someone and a piece of flesh comes off, that flesh has the genetic information inside it to change itself and prompt itself to operation. Again, it needs a specific environment and special conditions like a lab to achieve this, but the potential is still there. Is a zygote alive? Without a doubt. However, we would no more consider my clumsily removed skin to be its own person than this hypothetical zygote. Living cells are merely living cells, and I don't think that a person can be accurately defined as merely the cells of a Homo sapien. Admittedly, when you stitch enough cells together, You can end up with a person, but when is that switch made? Once the ship of Theseus and now a person. Let's simply acknowledge that while life is certainly a part of the criteria for personhood, alone it is a cartoonishly bad definition. Let's look at the conscious mind then. Perhaps we can find a person in this. A mind is what? Where thoughts occur? At the risk of introducing a rabbit hole, I think it prudent to at least mention the mind-body problem of philosophy. In an incredibly abridged and sort of pat-on-head simplistic way of explaining it, the mind-body problem arises from the contradiction that bodies occupy space, but minds do not. In philosophy, people tend to fall into one of two camps. Either you side with dualism and think that the mind and the brain are separate things, or you side with monism and think that the material of the brain is all there is. Perhaps you are merely your endorphins and nociceptor cells creating a weird illusion that we call consciousness. Or perhaps there is something supernatural about a mind that a properly evolved brain is somehow able to organize into consciousness. What this means practically is that we know that we can see that we possess brains, and we know that we have minds. What we don't know is whether the mind is only another name for the physical synapses of our brain, or if the mind sort of comes into existence when a brain achieves a level of consciousness. This is a much debated area of philosophy, and I will mention that some people think the mind-body problem is a non-existent problem because we can't even prove the existence of a body, much less a mind. So, yeah, there's a pretty solid reason that everyone hates philosophers. Let's take a real-world example of this problem of consciousness when it comes to people in comas or vegetative states. What separates these states from brain dead is that there still exists measurable brain activity. Brain death is the result of permanent catastrophic damage to the brain, resulting in no overall brain function. Typically, the difference between being brain dead versus in a persistent vegetative state is the death of the brainstem. In other words, if we cannot see evidence of brain activity to such a degree that their breathing and heart cease to function without assistance, we consider them dead, even if, technically, their body is alive with the help of machines. Is a healthy brain somehow creating a conduit for the mind to express itself? There are so many things we don't know about vegetative states. While it has been widely believed that people in comas and/or vegetative states are essentially absent of consciousness outside of some very basic responses to stimuli, one study suggested that some people still exhibited some understanding of the world around them. After showing them a short Hitchcock film and scanning their brain activity, they saw a synchronicity in the brain activity of a vegetative individual and a healthy individual, implying that a level of consciousness was present. Does this mean that the brain activity, that is, the firing of synapses measurable by fMRI, is the conscious mind? Or does this mean that the mind is extant in some other area and yet is, on occasion, measurably present in the firing of synapses? To answer these questions, we would need to answer the hardest question philosophers, scientists, and religious gurus have never been able to answer. Sadly, we can no more measure consciousness than Jay Schlatt can hide from his twink persona. The only thing any of us can know with absolute certainty is that we ourselves are conscious. We don't know if our siblings, parents, friends, or strangers are conscious. Let's accept that while we may not know where the mind exists, everyone on our side has one. Furthermore, in addition to the conscious mind, which tackles rationalization, short-term memory, or decision-making, there's also the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is the source of our creativity, our emotional responses, and our long-term memories. There's also the unconscious mind, which is usually relegated to the autonomic nervous system. This is your breathings, your heart rates, and your digestions. Focusing on the conscious and subconscious mind, we will find that there's more that makes up our thoughts and emotions than merely gray matter. Let's consider a slightly different scenario and examine the possible ethics surrounding where the mind resides and thus where our personhood exists. Tianjin University in China has recently grown brain cells that were then connected to and learned to control a robot. If it's human brain tissue, is that a person? Are those brain cells conscious? Is consciousness or a mind contained within the brain? Is it the case that where there are brains, there are minds, or are minds separate from brains? If minds are not separate from brains, and the existence of human brain tissue equates to the existence of a human mind, then imagine for a second the existence of those brain cells. You awaken, a person doomed with this temporary existence of pain as you are forced into being at the whim of a few scientists. Your understanding of the world, based solely on the positive and negative stimulation of your creators, as you learn to control your cursed synthetic body. A life consumed by darkness, fear of the unknown, and pain before dying due to a lack of suitable environment and the cruel indifference of those that grew you. Your life, like your death, reliant on the whim of another, and no one cares to consult you. Brain cells on a computer chip that you are. Or maybe minds are not only independent from brains, but require some unknowable third thing to exist in conjunction with brains. Maybe consciousness is quantum fields or the mysterious soul. Or maybe it's just cosmic entities playing D&D and our so-called consciousness is the DM making silly voices for the NPCs. The bottom line is, no one really knows for sure. Answering what is, on the surface, the incredibly simple question, what is a person, is so fraught with difficulty when we're talking about fully grown humans that it makes me think, perhaps our conversation shouldn't be about abortion or laws at all. A law requires a definition of terms, but the definition we need to determine the morality of abortion is ineffable. The point at which a fetus is more than a bunch of cells and becomes a person is not based on science, nor is it answered by religion. Anyone that says they know what makes a person is only giving you their perspective, not demonstrable fact. Since perspectives will always differ based on personal philosophy, this is a purely subjective issue. Once you know that neither the pro-choice nor the pro-life points of view offer real answers to these questions, you will realize that we have been trained to view our friends and family as the proverbial other. Everyone is convicted of their own rightness, and yet no one can provide definitive proof for their side. Maybe when we realize that being a person is almost as hard as just defining what one is, we learn to ask better questions, and, above all, we learn that we should simply try to be compassionate to people. It's easy for us to sit here and hypothesize about what is and what isn't, but actually making enormous moral decisions like whether or not you have a person inside you or whether it's a clump of cells is unbelievably difficult. You may have clicked on this video and immediately been upset by the opinions that were presented, or you may have gotten upset by the second part. But hopefully, if you've made it this far, you will make a promise with me. I promise that no matter what someone believes, I will recognize that they are a mere human, that they are likely struggling in unseen ways and desperately trying to make sense of a world they didn't ask to be a part of. None of us know anything apart from the fact that we are here and have experiences. I promise that although we don't know why or how or what comes next, I will choose to be good. I will choose to be thoughtful. But above all, I will choose to be kind. Thank you very much for discussing this with me. I will see you later. Thanks for watching. I would love to know what your thoughts on this subject are and why. If you have any ideas for other topics you'd like to discuss, let me know. Until next time. That I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you, and you'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will